Hello, welcome to Chat UTD. So, the final weekend of the Premier League is upon us, and we are battling for a place in the Europa League or the European Conference League. City down the road are competing for their fourth title in a row. It's not great, is it? But that's where we are. We'll have a little look back at Newcastle, the Newcastle game, and lots of positives to take. I said before the game that we needed to take something positive into the cup final, get results hopefully against Newcastle and Brighton, be it a draw or a win or just something positive, and we've already won one of those two games, which is great. I think you could see how starved of oxygen the fans have been by the response to the win, because the response to the win and the walk around at the end and Ten Hag's speech, looking at it, you'd had a really strong season. We've won one game, but I think that's indicative of the fans being so starved of oxygen that they'll take anything at the moment. Let's look at some specifics. Ahmad's a standout player from that game. He's a standout story from that game. Ahmad is a really popular lad amongst United fans. He had a great spell at Sunderland on loan. Looks a real player. I think he's got superb balance. He's got that low centre of gravity. He's strong considering his stature. He can take players on. He can beat players. His ball retention is good. He's intelligent. I think he could probably play in a 4-3-3. He could play anywhere across the front three. In a 4-2-3-1, I think he could play anywhere at a push across that whole front four. And in a 4-4-2, he could be an orthodox winger. He's versatile. He's adaptable. He's got a fantastic shot on him. And he seems to have a little bit of something about him. The fact he's not played so far this season, hardly any minutes, is criminal, in particular when you look at who's been getting in ahead of him. And for me, raises questions as to why that's been happening. And I'm personally keeping my eye on that over the weekend and in the cup final, because now Ahmad, without any question whatsoever, has to play from the start in both of the last two games of the season, unless he's rested for Brighton to save him, because I think he's become that important. When you've got momentum, which he personally has, but his part in the team has given us a little bit of shape and given us as a team a little bit of momentum. Going into a cup final, we had none. So you've got to accentuate that momentum, accentuate the positives, and that is a massive positive. So I'd be asking serious questions if someone else got in the team ahead of him from now to the end of the season. Really serious questions. So I hope that doesn't happen. But brilliant from Ahmad. I thought he was superb. A good performance. Bruno looked fresh. Bruno looked like a player who'd been rested rather than that had been injured and come back, which is really positive. He was superb. Not that that's unusual for me. I think he's a brilliant player. Amrabat, decent. I think he gives us something again we haven't got. I think his physical presence, his athleticism. I don't think he's particularly good on the ball. I think he's a great footballer, but for where we are, he's probably good enough to be in the team and doing what he did the other night. We do have a bit of a flip-flop fan base in terms of, like, he's played pretty decent against Arsenal, he played pretty decent against Newcastle, and now everyone's like, let's sign him. I've got to sign him now. It's like, by all accounts, I think the decision has been made not to sign him, so let's just enjoy the fact that he's doing all right at the end of the season. If he plays in the cup final, he'll probably give us something we haven't got, and maybe he can help us to achieve something we didn't think we could achieve. And beyond that, let's look at it if we need to in the summer. But I think we're getting carried away from two decent performances. But that's the fan base we have, and I'm going to come back to that a little bit later. Martinez got on the pitch as well. I shouldn't have forgotten that, which is great. There's a video doing the rounds of someone having a go at Rashford walking over to them, the players kind of bringing Rashford away, and there's a lot of judgments being made on it and people saying he shouldn't be abused and all this kind of stuff. It's really difficult when you don't hear what was said. So I've looked at it, I've listened to it. You can't hear what's being said unless it's racist, unless it's personally abusive. Then the person who's saying whatever they're saying, especially if it's about his football this season, is entitled to their opinion. There's a bit of a thing in the United fan base of you've got to stick up for your own players. You've got to support your own players. I'll support anybody who works hard, who looks like they want to play for Man United. Anybody. whether they're on 20 grand a week, 100 grand a week, 300 grand a week. And I think the majority of the fan base probably feel the same. But if there's someone that's not trying, and there's someone who is, for me, guilty of the worst crime, which is that they're getting paid and just kind of turning up, then I think every fan is entitled to their opinion on that. And look, Manchester is, historically was always, and probably to some degree still is, a working class place, and people take the mickey out of us and say, oh, your ground's full of cockneys. It's not. The majority of people in Old Trafford every week are from Manchester or the Greater Manchester area. And again, I think they share my values, that if you watch a player that runs around and tries his best, they might be quite limited. You'll still give that player a chance because you see their intent is good. You can't say that about Rashford. The bigger picture about him is quite important here. The club have made this problem. Because if Marcus Rashford was 100 grand a week squad player, he's not going to be getting dog's abuse on the sideline. The club have made this problem. They've made him the highest paid player and the highest profile player. They've done that. And what goes with that is expectations that he isn't able to meet. So what you then get is fans who probably have to work their arse off in the job that they do, stood there watching him and watching his body language and watching how much of hard work it seems to be for him even just to turn up. And they're like, yeah, I'm going to give you a bit of stick. Now, I remember going in the early 2000s when I used to have my season ticket, and we were quite near the pitch, and there's a guy in front of me. Whenever Giggsy was sub, this guy used to give Giggs dog's abuse, and it was personal. He'd say, you Welsh bastard, you sheep shagging bastard, da, 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 at Ryan Giggs, the most decorated player in United's history. Giggs never looked round, because he'd be like, he probably heard, he must have heard him, but he never just turn round, because Giggs is comfortable in his own skin. Giggs is thinking to himself, I've won God knows how many Premier League titles, and I'm probably going to win God knows how many more. You can say what you want about me. I come here and I do my best. And Giggs knows he could look at himself in the mirror and say that about himself. He wasn't always brilliant. He was quite a lot of the time, but he wasn't always brilliant. But you could always say he was a very successful academy product at Man United, and there's no debate about that. Rashford can't say that. So things get to you when there's some meaning and some truth in what whoever it is saying it. Unless, again, they're being abusive, personally abusive or racist or something like that, then obviously it's going to get to you. So I don't know what was said. Marcus Rashford looks like somebody who needs a fatherly or big brotherly figure to put their arm around his shoulder, but not just tell him how great he is, which I think he's getting at the moment. Tell him there's something in there, but you have to take responsibility for yourself, son. And you have to start looking at yourself, or your career is going to go down the Swanee. I think Ronaldo probably tried to do that with him, reading between the lines, because Ronaldo said in an interview with Steve Bauer, who used to work for MUTV years ago, I've tried to speak to some of the players, but they don't want to listen. And I surmise that's got to be Rashford that he's talking about. So if you don't listen to Cristiano Ronaldo, the greatest player in the game, or one of the greatest players in the game, certainly one of the greatest players Man United have ever had, then you've got a big problem. That's not about football. That's about you as a personality, not being able to receive feedback from someone like Cristiano Ronaldo. So is he too far gone? I would hazard a guess at yes. And people say you don't give up on your own, you support them. I think he's had a lot of support. But the club have left him open to what happened the other night by giving him the status he's not ready to live up to. Watching the walk around and the Erik ten Hag speech and everything, it was like we'd achieved something. There was a lot of the families were on the pitch, and I know it's an end of season tradition and all that, but the noise from the stands was loud. It was vociferous. Bruno Fernandes is being interviewed on the pitch, and he's having to go like that to hear what the person interviewing him is saying. There's a bit of a buoyant feeling around the place. Yeah, that comes from a win when you need one. I understand probably the relief of a win. But this is something I touched on before. We have been fed scraps as a fan base for the last, I'd say probably 10 years. So when you get anything more than a scrap, you treat it like it's a gourmet 5-star meal. But what that does is, when you've got an underachieving squad, I think it gives them license to think, we've bought ourselves a little bit of credit in the bank now. I don't think they do this consciously. I think it's a subconscious thing. But it's almost like you've got a kid who misbehaves all the time. And then he has a week at school where he does all right and he gets a few rewards and stickers and stuff like that. And he comes home at the weekend and his mum and dad are dead proud of him. And then on Monday, he's an absolute little turd because he thinks, well, I had a good week last week. I think there's an element of that about these players. I think they're quite petulant. I think they're quite immature. I think they don't have, as I've said before, the minerals to be Man United players. So if you give them adulation off the back of one result, you give them adulation off the back of a bloody 4-0 defeat against Crystal Palace. There's a big difference. There's a fine line. I'm trying to work out where we are on that line between standing together as a club and saying, this is a siege mentality. If that's what we're going with, I'm all for it. But I don't know if it is. I don't know if it is that. I think there's an element of it's also that we've been fed scraps and we're just delighted that we've won a game, or we're trying to look like we're great supporters to stick by everybody. I'm not sure. I'm not sure where I stand on it. I think the standards of United are on the floor, and that's come from the Glazers. Not to get political, but if you look at repressed races, if you look at repressed groups of people, there's evidence throughout the hundreds of years that because they get used to having so little, when you give them a tiny bit, when governments give them a tiny bit, they're grateful for it. And I think that's what the Glazers are a bit like that with United, and it trickles down. And I think that's what's happened here with United fans, because the standards are just non-existent. And I find it astounding that in a season when we're probably going to finish 8th with potentially the lowest points total we've ever had in the Premier League, I find it astounding that it's even a conversation that the manager could stay. Because all season he's stubbornly stuck by Rashford when we've got Ahmad there, and you see what he can do. All season he's not played Amrabat, who he apparently personally desperately wanted, and you can see what he can do. He's not tried to change the system to try and stem the tide until the last couple of games, after he'd said, I think it was before the Arsenal game, he said, I'm not going to change because I don't want the players to get confused. So he's not been able to solve the problems that have been there. Finishing where we're going to finish is not close to being acceptable. If you said at the start of the season, United will finish 8th and win the FA Cup, you're going to get a section of idiots going, sorry, not idiots, but a section of people going, well, we have to take it, you know, I was there in the 70s when we got relegated. Ugh. You're going to get those people, but that's a terrible season. Let's have it right. And some of the defeats and some of the performances have just been absolutely embarrassing. So one win against Newcastle doesn't change any of that. But we're hearing that there's a very good chance that he could keep his job. Said before, I'm not going to be shouting from the rooftops, get him out, he's a ball fraud. I'm not for that with him. If he stays, he stays. But if we're a serious football club, he has to go. And the things that are in his favour are, with a lot of the fans, he got a lot of credit in the bank for what he did last season, which is fair enough. He is he's benefiting from the fact that loads of managers have been sacked previously and nothing's really ever changed. It doesn't make him the right manager, but I think he's benefiting from that evidence that that's been the case before. There has been injuries and some mitigating circumstances. There has been the takeover. There has been some big stuff going on with players, like personal things and the Sancho thing. The Rashford stuff has been rumbling on. Anthony, Ronaldo, etc. There's been lots of different things there. Greenwood, obviously. So, and the fact that there's no viable options. Well, let's look at that. I beat the drum for him all the time. Thiago Motta, apparently in talks to be the next Juventus manager. Not Everton's the next manager. Not Wolves. Not West Ham. Juventus. Okay, he's got a reputation in Italy because he's done it with Bologna. But I don't understand why we're not in for him, because he is one of the best young managers in Europe. There isn't a big name manager that would come to United or that looks like they tick the boxes for Ineos. Okay, but we're supposed to be moving away from that. I think it's kind of a lazy argument to say there's no one out there, because as a club, you've got to spread your net a little bit wider. You might have to look a little bit more left field. You might have to be a little bit innovative. Apparently, and it was David Ornstein that said it, so it's quite a trustworthy source. He said that Sir Jim Ratcliffe, if they do sack Ten Hag, is looking at maybe a younger manager. I'm cool with that. And Motta falls into that category. He's the one that immediately springs into my head. People have mentioned Kieran McKenna. Now, if Kieran McKenna's being mentioned, surely you've got to think about Thiago Motta. I wouldn't be necessarily against Kieran McKenna. I don't think Juventus would be going in for him, but you know, I like that idea more than I like Graham Potter or Thomas Tuchel, because it's what's the word? It's innovative. There's a little bit of imagination to it. There's a bit of he's a young manager, done really well. Can he transfer those skills into this hugely different environment that's Old Trafford and United? That's a big question. But I'd rather than do that than just go for some boring choice, or stick with Ten Hag because there's no one else out there. There's thousands of managers in the world of football. Do your homework and go and pick one. It doesn't have to be what the press say. It doesn't have to be what we say as fans. Go and do your homework. You've got Omar Barada, you've got Dan Ashworth, you've got Jean-Claude Blanc. Between them, I'm pretty sure if they cast their net wide, you'd find a manager who could come and do a better job than Erik Ten Hag's doing now. So I'm not having that as an excuse. The last game, Brighton. What's the most amount of points we can get now? Is it 60? I think it might be 60. And potentially we could finish 7th. So not loads to play for. Depressing that City are playing for a league title, but we have got a win to take us into the weekend, and we'll see where we go from there. But the Reds, Glazers out.